In an article by the Gospel Coalition entitled, "Why the Church Needs Pastor Theologians," Sweeney writes, "Most people from church history who continue to inform Christian thinking today worked mainly as ministers in ecclesial settings. Some taught from time to time in Christian colleges and seminaries. Most wrote books, but they spent the bulk of their time with their parishioners, preparing to teach and preach in ways that met their daily needs, helping them to do all Jesus had commanded, and praying God would bless their efforts for his glory. During the past 2 centuries, things have changed. Christians today don't look primarily to pastors as their most important intellectual guides. Professional academics and social media influencers have usurped the role clergy formerly played. There are understandable reasons why this has occurred, and we can't simply return to how things were before. But neither should pastors see this as a reason to abdicate their charge to serve the whole counsel of God's word to God's people. There are modern ways for pastors to take the lead once again in renewing and informing the intellectual lives of God's people. So how can pastors continue to engage the heart and the mind? Stay tuned until the end. If this is your first time here, make sure and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a video or an interview. Our goal is to help you enter into a confirmed, confident, and eternal relationship with the source of all life and purpose. Often, when I converse with pastors on the need for apologetics in our churches, it is precisely because it affects everything else we do in our churches. It affects our ability to make disciples as well as our ability to evangelize well. I was asked once in an interview if I thought that anti-intellectualism was hurting the church, to which I responded, yeah, but it doesn't have to. When Jesus was asked by a Pharisaical lawyer which commandment in the law was great or was greatest, Jesus responded, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." In Jesus' mind, it is impossible to fully love God without engaging our minds in the process. Apologetics is concerned with the accurate defense of the faith, often through scientific, philosophical, archaeological, or historical evidence. It's impossible to be well versed in these disciplines without effectively utilizing our minds. As Christians who either use apologetics from time to time or as a full-time apologist, if we want to earn the right to be heard amongst our secular counterparts, we're going to have to meet other intellectuals in their sphere of influence or expertise. Describing the social world of today, Moreland writes, "Likewise, knowledge is identical to scientific knowledge. If you can prove something scientifically, then it is permissible or even obligatory to believe it. Science is the measure of all things. And when a scientist speaks about something, he or she speaks ex cathedra." Now, there's internal flaws with the secular thought that science is the measure of all things. One such flaw is that science can't explain how the scientist is even able to do science. The rationality necessary to engage in scientific endeavors can only exist in a theistic framework. Scientists were able to do science because they were Christian. It's not that these are scientists who happen to have been Christians. It's that by their own admission, Christianity gave them their science. The scientists who began their fields were almost all Christian. And that doesn't prove that Christianity is purely scientific, but it does give us insights into the God that they were seeking and serving. For example, Robert Boyle defined the elements, compounds, mixtures, and discovered the first gas law, Boyle's law. Prominent and proud Christian. Antoine Lavoisier was the founder of modern chemistry. He discovered oxygen's role in combustion and respiration and discovered that water is a compound of hydrogen and oxygen. Francis Collins, who for a time was arguably the most prominent scientist in the United States. He was the director of NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health. He invented positional cloning. He also took part in the discovery of the genes for cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, and neurofibromatosis. He was also the director for the National Human Genome Research Institute for 15 years and helped map the human genome. He is also a very prominent and proud Christian. Charles Babbage is the father of the computer and invented the analytical engine, a Turing complete computer in 1837. It was the first general-purpose computer. Once again, proud Christian. Georges Lemaitre was the first to posit the startling idea of Big Bang cosmology in 1931. And the theory accepted by nearly all astronomers today was a radical departure from the scientific orthodoxy in the 1930s. Many astronomers at the time were still uncomfortable with the idea that the universe is expanding. Because if there's an expanding universe, that means that the universe had a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, it had a beginner. And of course, Isaac Newton, who was the father of modern physics. He famously delineated 3 important laws of motion, as well as did a lot of work on optics and theology. So this debunks the myth that science is somehow at war with Christianity or a belief in God. Quite the contrary. Christianity provides a testable faith. Christianity presents a set of facts and propositions to be true and is completely comfortable with anyone testing those claims. Nevertheless, as apologists and more broadly as Christians, we have to, with reason, be able to point out such self-refuting statements. Therefore, all believers need to develop the skill of thinking well and thinking deeply about what they believe. In our goal to grow as disciples of Christ and to go from babes to mature saints, our minds must grow as well. Our ability to reason well and present logical arguments in support of a Christian worldview will be more likely to gain respect in our hyper-offended society. Moreland writes, "By reason, I simply mean the faculties in isolation or in combination I use to gain knowledge and justify my beliefs. Therefore, we must share evidentially based reasons for following Jesus." Moises Silva wrote, "Similarly, there is greater likelihood of progress in a debate if, instead of throwing out a general allegation about an individual's logical lapse, we make an effort to identify the specific fallacy we have detected. Apologetics helps us to grow in confidence as disciples of Jesus as we begin to see the value of reason and how unbiased reasoning actually affirms the tenets, mandates, and principles of Christianity. At that point, a Christian worldview isn't simply our version of truth, it is communicated as an accurate depiction of reality. The need exists, whether it be in apologetics, hermeneutics, or biblical history, because the danger, as Charles Spurgeon put it, is that a time will come when instead of shepherds feeding the sheep, the church will have clowns entertaining the goats. Christians, and specifically pastors, need to be able to articulate the reasons for our beliefs, as well as the historical support for what the Bible unveils. That being the goal, the question may be asked, how did we get here? In assessing why the mind matters, Moreland sketches how the notion of using one's mind for God lost respect and became less prevalent in recent decades amongst a growing number of church congregants as well as pastors. As anti-intellectualism began to creep into churches, apologetics was viewed as unnecessary, and revivals imbued with emotionalism became more primary. Referencing the impact of revivals, Moreland writes, "Thousands of people were converted to Christ by revivalist preaching, but they had no real intellectual grasp of Christian teaching. As a result, 2 of the 3 major American cults began in the burned-over district among the unstable, untaught converts: Mormonism, 1830, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, 1884. Christian Science arose in 1866, but was not connected with this area. Additionally, with the rise of empiricism displayed through the works of Locke and Hume, the Christian church had to some degree vacated the discipline of philosophy. Now, this is not because the Bible has no good answers, but the absence of a plethora of good Christian minds caused some to believe that Christianity no longer had good answers, causing the Bible to lose relevance except for its use as an ethical guidebook. Moreland writes, "Instead of responding to these attacks with a vigorous intellectual counterpunch, many believers grew suspicious of intellectual issues altogether." Another issue that has arisen comes from within Christendom. Some Christians and theologians have differing views on the role of philosophy in life and in doing theology well. Some, who favor a philosophy intention view, believe that Christians should distrust their ability to reason well due to our fallen nature. Therefore, they believe there should always be a tension between faith and philosophy. Steve Wilkins notes, that many who embrace the tension view emphasize the vast ontological distance that distinguishes creator from creation. God's transcendence, this perspective argues, necessitates that the means by which we know of God differ from the process by which we come to other types of knowledge. Another view is a synthesis of faith and reason. A philosophical position known as faith-seeking understanding argues that God's salvific work restores both reason and will to the extent that reason can be of spiritual benefit to the believer. Alan Paget asserts that theology and philosophy are best understood as different academic disciplines or traditions of inquiry, which can at certain points work together as colleagues in the development of a Christian worldview. This seems like a logical starting point for several reasons. First, how does a theologian present an argument for the existence, omniscience, or salvific work of God without utilizing philosophy to some degree? Second, in order for theology or a Christian worldview to obtain its rightful place in academia, it will need to demonstrate sound reasoning for its principal tenets. This is not to say that if the academy doesn't align with or affirm Christianity that somehow the battle is lost. We're not saying that. Rather, since Christianity is a system undergirded by certain truth claims, it is only to the benefit of the Christian to be able to intelligently present reasons for those claims. Thirdly, to disregard philosophy as antithetical or even as an enemy of faith is to abandon a discipline largely concerned with rational thinking. In a society already antagonistic to any claims of religious truth, this would validate the incorrect but largely accepted belief that anyone who believes in God is irrational, illogical, or uninformed. One thing that is certain is that regardless of if someone espouses a faith and philosophy in tension view or a view that sees a synthesis of faith and reason, there is a need to engage our minds in order to clearly express the Christian worldview. The stakes are too high when we consider sending our young people into a hyper-secular culture armed only with a sparse understanding of God and His truth. J.P. Moreland wrote, "I can testify that our churches are not preparing young people for what they will face intellectually in their college years, and we simply must be more intentional about this." If we commit to training Christians holistically, mind included, then invariably the issue of what role the mind plays in coming to and explaining faith will arise. Those who avow the faith and philosophy in tension perspective view that sin's lingering effects continue to diminish and distort reason's capacity to comprehend divine truth even after regeneration. Thus, reliance upon rationality to discern the nature and ways of God does more harm than good. This seems to present problems because what follows from such a view is that at no point are we able to reason well. This means to be able to support a tension view, you have to be able to trust that your perspective is not corrupted by your continued inability to reason well. Furthermore, an overemphasis on keeping faith and philosophy in tension will prevent Christians from engaging in the necessary activity of combating purely secular philosophy. Neither Jesus nor the biblical writers seem to be advocating that we mitigate our ability to reason soundly. Craig Boyd notes that the fideist contends that arguing for God's existence or trying to provide a rationale for why one believes what one believes never produces faith itself. However, I believe such a position makes faith seem blind instead of a logically placed trust in a certain truth or set of facts, and ultimately in a person. Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment." That's a bold statement. Additionally, Paul provided the Galatian, Corinthian, and Thessalonian churches, as well as those in the Areopagus, with numerous reasons for believing that Jesus is the Christ and did rise from the grave. By no means should we discount the redemptive and gracious work of God through the Holy Spirit, but based upon the choices required in coming to salvation and in sustaining a Christian lifestyle, it is not practical or expedient to discount the benefits of sound philosophical reasoning. We must seek to find the balance between our God-given ability to reason and engage in philosophy and the sovereignty of God. Paget writes, While some Christian groups are highly suspicious of human reason, the Bible sees learning, reason, and wisdom as gifts to be used for God's glory. Thinking is natural to humanity, a normal part of our created abilities. Biblical religion does not have a problem with thinking, learning, or human knowledge. It does have a problem with human thinking when it sets itself against the purposes of God. For this reason, a regenerated mind can serve well in philosophy or philosophical endeavors. A deeper look at how the church got to its current state will further reveal what needs to be done and why. In the article, the author continues, in the wake of the Enlightenment, when Christendom dissolved, modern research universities rose to great prominence, and technological changes facilitated democratizing trends across the globe. The clergy began to lose the cultural authority they'd formerly taken for granted. Christians today don't look primarily to pastors as their most important intellectual guides. Professional academics and social media influencers have usurped the role clergy formerly played. Luther and Edwards enjoyed legally sanctioned status as intellectual leaders. The laity were expected, often required, to attend and support their teaching ministries. People's livelihoods and prospects depended on compliance with the state church structures that organized their worlds. As a result, pastors could serve most citizens a well-balanced diet of divine revelation, interpreting and applying it to the struggles of their everyday lives. When these state church structures were removed, however, the laity no longer had to eat what they disliked. Church leaders now had to use voluntary means to gain a hearing from the public. It's hard to persuade those who don't have to do anything they don't like to choose intellectual effort and theological nourishment in Sunday morning services. It's easier to draw a crowd and hold their attention with the biblical equivalent of fast food, pandering to unhealthy taste. That's what many evangelical churches did. As a result, over time, most people looking for experts on life's big questions went elsewhere for nourishment. They consulted academics and public intellectuals with big media footprints. The consequences for everyday discipleship and witness have been tragic. Surveys show most Christians today are theologically illiterate, malnourished by the people called to feed them. There is no other way forward than calling pastors to take their call to educate God's people seriously. It's not enough to say that you're too busy to keep learning. It's no longer good enough to provide people a good time in the Holy Spirit that ends when they leave the building. It's time to meet people where they're at and bring them to where they need to be for the glory of God. The author concludes, we'll always need schools to offer specialized training to our ministerial leaders. Seminaries especially offer such a rich curriculum of specialized studies in our subjects that pertain to our Christian lives and ministries. Hebrew, Greek, church history, philosophy, psychology, hermeneutics, intercultural studies, and more. That it's hard to think of teaching God's people without them. But the kind of education God's people need today is too important to be left to academics and other non-ecclesial thinkers. Such people often hold to Christian orthodoxy lightly if they value it at all. Their work is often energized by secular concerns. They're motivated by tenure and promotion within their schools, fame and fortune in the media. They're not driven mainly by the needs of church people. There is too much at stake in our pluralistic, relativistic society to leave our children and those that lead them armed with only a personal experience as evidence that Christianity is true. Apologetics is not optional. And nowhere does God call us to check our brains at the church door. We are to come to Him and to the church with our whole selves, mind included, so that our whole selves may be used for the glory of God. But I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the relationship between faith and the academy should be? How do you view using your mind to glorify God? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, peace.